For those of you who have just joined the webinar, we are going to be kicking this off today momentarily here. My name is Grant Gerlich with TriStar, and we will have Joe Wuellner as our product expert here with KeyShot. He will be demonstrating the capabilities of KeyShot with the 3D rendering. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the question box in the webinar, and we will go ahead and we will answer those towards the end of the presentation, at which point Joe will have a Q&A section. However, if you're having any connectivity issues, please go ahead and type those, and we'll try to address those immediately. So I suppose without further ado, I will introduce you to Joe Wuellner, and he can go ahead and review our agenda. Thank you once again for taking the time to join us, and I look forward to answering your questions. Joe, I'll go ahead and I'll turn this over to you now.
All right, thanks so much, Grant. Hi, everyone. We're going to be going through how to create realistic renderings from 3D models, and we're going to be going over this specifically using KeyShot. So in this specific webinar, we're going to be going through how we can take our KeyShot models from our design software and move it into KeyShot. Then we'll look at the rendering workflow for creating our three-dimensional renders of that model, and we'll also take a look at the animation workflow. Those are going to be the 2 points and 2 workflows that we cover in this webinar. After that, we'll have some questions and answers. If I cannot answer your question immediately, then we can always come back, take down your information, take down your question, and go into it a little bit more in depth after the webinar. So with that, let me go ahead and switch to my three-dimensional modeling program. So since I use Creo, and I work at TriStar, which is PTC's largest reseller, I am very comfortable with making my models in Creo. And once I've made it in Creo, then I'm going to want to move it into KeyShot to create my realistic rendering. Here you can see I just have an assembly. This assembly is made up of multiple parts. All these parts have been put together to create my final assembled model. And I've also prepared it in a way that it's going to work well in KeyShot, meaning that I've added all of the rounds, I've added all of the extra features that make sure my model is going to react well to the materials that I apply. So now that I've created this, I actually have the KeyShot plugin installed. So the KeyShot plugin is going to let me move directly from my three-dimensional modeling software into KeyShot. So I don't have to exit the software, open up KeyShot, open up the file within KeyShot and import it. Rather, I can just move directly from Creo, in this case, into KeyShot and have linked sessions between both. On that note, there are a couple of different programs that they offer plugins for. Here you can see a total list of this. I'm on the KeyShot website. We just have our KeyShot plugins, which are under resources, downloads, plugins. And you can see all of the different softwares that I can move directly from into KeyShot. So with that, let's take a look at what I will do to move into KeyShot from Creo. Here I just have my assembly. You can see with the plugin, I have my KeyShot tab now within my dashboard. So to move into it, I'll just say render. I also have a couple of other options here, and these are going to be similar to your options within your own individual modeling program. And first, let's start with settings. So we'll move right to left. Settings, I have the option to specify a tessellation level. So tessellation is going to allow KeyShot to change my CAD data into triangles. And those triangles are going to allow KeyShot to more efficiently make the changes to my model that I want it to. Now, I can always turn that up or down. By default, I think it's about 2. I'm going to set it to 4 so I can make sure to have good geometry. We also have a couple other options. So materials, you can see we can separate the materials by part, meaning that each individual part that's coming from my CAD assembly is going to be linked with its other parts. So I have multiple, for instance, latches in this assembly. All those latches are going to be linked in their material. If I apply a material to one latch, it's going to apply to all of them. I also have the ability to use the assembly to assign my materials. This is just going to be a different way of dividing up my components and applying materials in a linked way. Under that, we have our NURBS, and NURBS is going to be the actual CAD data that we can import alongside our tessellated data. NURBS data, for the most part, we're not going to use within KeyShot. It can really slow down the rendering. I believe it's about 2 to 4 times slower using NURBS data. Usually it's best to just re-import or update, or rather increase your tessellation level to have better geometry within KeyShot. So I'll go ahead and uncheck that. We also have our assembly orientation, and right now it's set to Y. The Y orientation is going to be determined from my default CAD orientation. So this is going to make sure that my model imports in that upwards orientation. If I chose X or Z, it would be sideways. If I chose -Y, it'd be upside down. I also have the option to change the way in which my sessions are linked. So I can either make the update automatic, meaning that if I change anything, it's automatically going to update within KeyShot, or I can make it manual, meaning that I will have to manually update. I also have the ability to use a .fra file to transfer my mechanisms. So if I have an assembly, and this assembly is defined with connections, those connections allow movement between components, I can bring that data into KeyShot as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and say, okay. And then we have our update, and right now you can see it's set to automatic. If I were to hit update, it would just push my geometry through to KeyShot once more. If I make any changes, I can do that manually. Right now it's set to automatic, so it will just automatically change. And then we have our render option. And render, we can either choose to immediately render, meaning that we're going to open up KeyShot, or if we don't have KeyShot installed in the workstation that we're working with, we can always export. And that's going to create a .bip file, which is a KeyShot file that you can take to a different workstation and create your render there. So since I have KeyShot installed, I'll just go ahead and say render. And as you can see, KeyShot 7 is now starting. And once I've entered KeyShot 7, you can see some information is already displaying. So my setup is a little bit different than the default setup. Right now, I'm in the dark display. You can always change that to a lighter display if you choose. Also, in preferences, I have my hotkeys set to Creo. Now, you can always change your hotkeys to match whichever program you're using. So you can see here all of the different hotkey presets. This is just going to make it a lot easier to move from one program to another. You don't have to relearn all your key sets. You can just reuse what you already know. That really lets KeyShot be very versatile and very quick to pick up. Also, you're probably hearing my computer revving up. That fan is starting to blow. And a lot of that is caused because KeyShot is a CPU-based rendering program, meaning that we don't need a GPU or graphical processing unit to create this render. Rather, all of our render is going to be created in our CPU, or a central processing unit. That unit is used to run pretty much everything in our computer. And if we want to maybe run a different program, check our email, do something else while KeyShot is running, we're going to need to make sure that we manage our CPU usage correctly. And KeyShot lets us do that very quickly. So as we continue through the interface, you can see here that we have our toolbar up top, we have our workspaces. Next to that, we have our CPU usage. You can see we can choose anywhere between 25 and 100%. I'll go ahead and leave it at 75 so that other programs can run as well. Next to that, we have our ability to pause. So pausing is going to pause our real-time rendering, meaning that we're going to cease all CPU usage at this time so that maybe we need to go back and update this geometry. We can pause it, go back to our modeling program, and have our CPU available for that. Now going back to KeyShot, I'll go ahead and resume. Next to our pause, we have our performance mode. And performance mode is going to allow KeyShot to turn off shadows and turn off any other extraneous or superfluous rendering items, so we can quickly move through our rendering workflow before we actually want to create that final photorealistic view. So that's always an option. Then next to that, we just have a couple of camera options, so I'll go ahead and skip those, and we can begin our workflow. So now we're going to begin our KeyShot workflow. We imported from our CAD system. Now, if we want to, we could always go to File, Import, and there we could choose whatever item we would like to import. Here you can see all the different files we can use to create a KeyShot rendering. You can see not only all of our different CAD program files, but here we also have our different transfer files as well. So you can use any of those. I'll go ahead and cancel this since we already have our object loaded, and we can continue here. So the next step is going to be understanding our scene, understanding our scene tree, and understanding how to apply materials. And this is going to be done by opening up our project tab. Here we have the rest of our interface. You can see on the left, we have our library. Our library is going to be where we can access all of our KeyShot resources. So all of those predefined objects that come with KeyShot, including all of our different materials, different colors, textures, environments, and backplates. We also have our favorite tab, and our favorite tab we can use to quickly create new folders and add specific library objects to it, just to speed up our workflow. Now, next to our library tab, we have our actual window. This is going to be where we see our render being created. Also notice that I have my heads up display turned on, so hotkey is H for that. That's just going to show me my FPS, the time I've had my render running, as well as the samples, triangles, resolution, and focal length. This can be very useful for making sure you understand how long it takes to create the render and use that to create our settings for our render outputs. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at our project tree next. So to do that, I'll just go to this bottom toolbar. There we have our project tab. When I click that, it's going to open up my project window on the right of my screen. So this is going to be a window that I can always disconnect if I would like, move it around. I can exit it and reopen it. I can also redock it. We also have a couple of tabs here, just like our library. Our first tab is going to be our scene. So our scene shows us what is included within our current view. Right now you can see we have our models defined. Underneath our models, we have each individual part that is included within my assembly. So I have my bottom, top, my different pins, my different latches, and my latch pins as well. Then I also have my cameras. You can see here that since I imported directly from Creo, I have all of my camera settings from Creo as well. So I can always double click any of these to access them. I'll go back to my free camera and reorient. And here I'm just using the same hotkeys, the same key commands that I would use in my CAD program to do these movements, which makes it very easy to use. Now, the first step is going to be, after we've understood all of our components in our model tree, is going to be assigning materials. So here you can see within our Scenes tab in our project window, we have our properties and our materials. So properties is going to show the properties for each individual item, and materials is going to show all of the materials that are currently included within our scene. Here you can see all of them are the same material. These are all default materials brought in from KeyShot or from Creo. You can see as I hover over them, they tell me the type. This is going to be the type of material that is applied. It's just a diffuse, which means it's just a color. Now, if I would like to start assigning different materials to different components, I can do that by going to my Materials tab in my library, and there I can select any of my materials here. So there's been a lot of improvement in this material library from 6 to 7, including a lot of different paint colors and other information. These materials are really nice. They allow you to quickly create the render, that photorealistic render that you want to have. And this is done by applying these materials. The materials include a combination of color, of texture, of roughness, of transparency. So all these things are predefined within our material library, and we can just choose one and apply it. So since this is a case, I'll go ahead and use plastic, and here I'll just go with my clear rough plastic. Now to apply it, I can just go ahead, drag it over, and you can see we have our preview. If I don't like it, I can continue to hold my left mouse button and not apply it, just preview it, move it around, and then when I release, it's going to copy. So I can apply that to both the top and the bottom. Now, also, I'm going to want to add material to these latches, and to do that, I can once more just select a material and drag it over and hover and drop and release. Now, notice that when I applied the material to one latch, it applied to all of them. So this is because we allowed for KeyShot to assume the linked material between parts. So since all these latches are the same part, any material applied to one is going to be applied to all. Also, notice that this latch over here did not update. That's because this latch was created using a different technique. It's actually a different part. And so since it's not the same part, it's not linked. If I would ever like to change the material without changing the material for these other linked objects, I can always unlink also. So I can just select the part either in my scene tree or in my graphics window, and there I have the option to unlink material. Now, if I were to apply a new material to that component, you can see it's going to update and be unlinked. If I'd ever like to relink, I can always select it, right-click, and choose to link. So let's see, copy linked material, paste linked material. And now that part is going to be once more connected to the other components. So let's go ahead, I will copy this material and link this part with my other latches, and we can continue. So the next step will probably be these pins. Whoa. So to apply material to these pins, I can go ahead and hide these other components. Let's go ahead, select this one, hide part, and then down here, I can hide this part as well. Now we're just going to see those individual latches and our pins. I can go to my metal tab, and there just select a metal to apply. And also notice that as I apply this material and make any changes to the camera, that KeyShot is automatically updating and re-rendering. You'll notice that here in my heads-up display, I have my time. Every time I move it, that time resets, meaning that KeyShot is re-beginning that rendering process. This can really cause a strain on our CPU. So if we would like to turn that off or decrease that requirement for our CPU while we apply materials, we can always enable performance mode. And you can see that's going to get rid of shadows, it's going to get rid of reflections and decrease that rendering quality while we go through the rest of our workflow. So now since I've applied that material, I'll go ahead and right click and say show all parts. That's going to bring back those components that I hid. And now we have all of our materials assigned. The next step is going to be going through these individual materials, and we can actually examine them and take a look at how they are defined. Here you can see once I click on one material, it's going to show me all of that material information. We have our material type, and that's currently metal. That's going to determine the rest of this information shown within our project window. If we change from metal to diffuse, you can see all that information changes as well. I'll go ahead and change that back to metal. And we have all of our different types of materials that we can use. As I click through the rest of these, you can see since these two are the same material, they're both going to be metal. If I select this rough plastic, you can see it's plastic transparent versus plastic cloudy, or any other type. Now, if we want to understand this material a little bit more in depth, we can always go to the material graph. And the material graph is going to give us a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on. So you can see here right now, we only have one node in our material graph. This is just a plastic transparent, and we have the values defined for that transparent plastic here. We can always increase or decrease these values or change any of these colors as well. If I were to go to, let's say, this aluminum, let's take a look at its material. You can see it's a little bit more complex. This is the material graph specifically for this already predefined material. If I wanted to make changes to it, I could always add my own nodes and really take manual control of it. We also have the ability to add a multi-material. This is going to let us add multiple materials to one component so that we can quickly switch between them depending on our rendering requirements or scenes. That means we don't have to have multiple different files with multiple different materials applied. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue. Now we have our textures. Textures are going to be primarily diffuse, bump, opacity, and specular. Here you can see diffuse, specular, bump, and opacity. Diffuse is going to be the color, so we can always change that. We can select a different color and apply it here if we choose to. We also have our specular. This is going to determine the way in which white light reflects off of our material. We can choose different objects there if we would like to as well. Our bump is going to be primarily that texture that is applied to the material or the smoothness of it. So here I could always go, let's say, brushed, and you can see now that texture is updating for our material. And opacity is going to be for the transparency or determine the way in which we can see through that material, so we can always apply items to that as well. So these are different texture types. All of these texture types are going to have their individual options too. So you can see here the texture type, our mapping type. We can always change that to any other mapping type if we choose to. Change our center. We can also move and rotate that texture to match it up with specific geometry so that we have a more realistic view. In all these ways, KeyShot really lets you take control if you would like, but if you don't want to, there is a quick and easy way to get these items, and that's going to be primarily from the predefined materials. If you can't find anything, also, another note, if you can't find anything that you think should be here or seems pretty common in our library, we can always go to the cloud library. That's going to have even more information that you can download and use in KeyShot. So each individual object or each individual material has its own material graph, its own properties, its own textures, and then we have labels. And labels are going to be those items applied on top of our material that are not our material but exist outside of it. So we can use this for things like a TriStar label. You can see we can use the move tool to fit it. We can always select position and just click to fit as well. We can scale it and translate. And if we choose to, we can also use this position marker to select a specific position that the label is going to be applied to. And that's going to be primarily done with our camera. So you can see here right now, from this view, we're about right. Now, each individual label is going to be applied within that specific material. So this label is being applied on top of the rough plastic. It's going to be within that material under the labels tab. But the label itself also has its own properties. So we have our label properties and our label textures. If we choose to, we can enable any of these settings and bring in those textures from either other sources or even reference the texture that's already been applied to the material. So I'll go ahead and leave that label for now, and we can move on. Next, we have our environment. Our environment is going to allow us to determine the other information in our render. Right now, we have our model, and our model is defined from our CAD. Now, our model has all of its materials included within each individual part of that assembly, but we also need to pay attention to the environment in which our object or assembly is placed. And this is going to be managed within this environment tab. Here we can define either our lighting environment, which is going to be our HDRI. You can see by default, I have my startup.hdr. If I wanted to change that default HDRI environment, I could always go to Edit, Preferences, and I have the ability to change it there. But since I didn't change it, I can just go and select from the environments in the library a new environment to apply to this specific rendering. So you can see once I drag and drop it, we now have our environment being applied. If I zoom all the way out, you can see the way in which our environment is applied. Our part or assembly is located within the center of a circle or sphere, and our environment is on the perimeter of that sphere. That's going to allow us to see all of that different lighting. Now, the HDRI editor is going to be something that KeyShot 7 has updated. Also, KeyShot 7 moving from 6 has changed all of these HDRIs to be procedural, meaning that if we want to, we can always modify a predefined HDRI. I can select a node, right-click, delete that, for instance, and change my lighting setup. Now, I can also increase the brightness. I can change the contrast. I can change the size and height, as well as rotation. So there are multiple things that we can move within KeyShot. One is going to be the camera. The second is going to be the model and components. And the third is going to be our lighting environment. So we can change either of those three things to make sure we have the perfect setup to show off whatever we are trying to show. Also, notice I'm in performance mode. If I wanted to, I could turn off performance mode, and you can see the shadows that are taking place from our lighting environment. As I rotate, those shadows move and change. Now, also, we have the ability within KeyShot Pro to use the HDRI editor. The HDRI editor is going to let us change that lighting environment. So within the basic KeyShot package, you're going to be only able to reference existing HDRIs and download from the cloud existing HDRIs. With the KeyShot Pro, you're going to be able to use the HDRI editor, change those pin locations, add different pins if you would like. And really take control of your lighting environment, depending on what you are trying to accomplish. Now, alongside the lighting environment, we also have the ability to specify lighting. And lighting is going to be primarily the settings that are used to calculate the ray bounces and the way in which light propagates through our render. Right now, you can see that Our lighting is set to basic. If I were to go to performance mode, you can see our lighting presets switches back to performance mode. Also, notice that our environment lighting changes according to our different selections. So as I select these different presets, these other settings are going to change with those presets. If we want to have specific presets ourselves, we can always go to custom. There we can define our own specific presets and apply them and save them so we can reference it later on and speed up our workflow. So I'll go back to basic. Now, with this, we also have the ability to change our cameras. And cameras are going to be defining the way in which we view our model. So right now, I'm in the free camera. And I'm not going to add a highlight, so I'll go ahead and continue. With the free camera, I can define a specific angle that I want to observe my object from. I can also use the position and orientation to define specific values. And you can see here, it's defining all these spherically. We also have the ability to set a camera target and to use the walkthrough mode. So if you're using this for architecture or any kind of interior design, you can always specify multiple cameras and use the walkthrough mode to show off a progression through those cameras. We also have the ability to stay above ground and to change our other information for our lens and depth of field. Here you can see right now we're set to orthographic. If we wanted to, we could go to perspective. And within perspective, we can adjust and change all of these perspective objects to really get the render that we would like and have the angle that we would like to have as well. We also have shift. Shift is going to allow us to have 2-point perspective and eliminate one of those different ways of viewing our model, so that if we have, for instance, architecture that we'd like to show off, we can do that with the shift lens. As you can see, each one of these is going to have its own individual settings that we can change and really take control of the camera using those settings. Now, we also have our depth of field, and depth of field is going to let us specify focal point and define f-stop and focal distance. So if you've ever used a manual camera, you understand the idea of using your aperture to change the way in which you see things and the way in which you focus. You can do a similar thing using this depth of field. So I can select a focal point and I can change that f-stop to increase or decrease my out of focus portion. Also, something to note, here you can see we're at the very end of this slider. Within KeyShot, you always have the ability to specify values that are greater than the slider maximum. So right now it says 212. Let's go ahead and try 300. And you can see once I enter 300, that's going to be my new max value. You can always change that to something greater if I would like. So if there's any value that you would like to exceed, don't worry about being limited. You can always increase or decrease by just selecting it and changing that value. So now once we've defined our camera, there's one thing that I forgot to do, and that's actually going to be in the environments, and that's going to be defining what is showing behind our model. So right now, we're just showing the lighting environment. You can see here in the settings tab of our environment that our background is just the lighting environment. Usually it's best to select either a color or a backplate. Backplate is going to allow us to bring in either a photo that we've taken or a backplate from our library. So I can always drag and drop a backplate in here. And you can see now we're going to be positioning our model on that two-dimensional backplate. So if we want to match a specific backplate, we can always do that using our camera settings and select that backplate, select references, maybe these different lines, and create a three-dimensional model that's going to match the angles and focal points of that specific backplate. We also have the ability to select a color. We can use our eyedropper tool and actually select specific colors from our model. So maybe I would like to place my backplate on a color that exists here. I can always just select that color and set it as my backplate too. All of these are different options. They're really going to determine, or rather it's going to be up to you to determine the way in which you want to create your render and the context you want it in. Being able to manipulate that environment using the HDRI editor is very handy when it comes to matching backplates. So if you want to be able to take pictures of specific environments and place your models in those environments, I do suggest you get that HDRI editor capability. That's just going to let you match the shadows and color sources or light sources more directly from your backplate. Now, with that said, the last step after we define our camera would be to define our image and create our render. And that's going to be done in the image tab. Here you can see our resolution. Right now it's locked, meaning that if I change the size of my screen, my resolution is not going to change. This means, and if I were to unlock it, you can see if I change the size of my window, my resolution is changing with that. So locking it is going to keep it the same no matter what changes happen. We have a couple of presets. Presets are going to, or rather this resolution is really the canvas that we're creating on. So we can use these presets to define specific pixel values if we would like. You can see landscape, portrait, and custom. And we can always add our own custom resolution if we choose to. Then we have our brightness and gamma. So if we need to adjust these, we can take control of them within this image tab. And we have our different effects that we can apply. Finally, we have the ability to render. So going to render in that bottom toolbar, we can choose our specific format. We can choose the name as well as the folder that we are exporting to. You can see all of our different format types, our resolution for this rendering, as well as our print size and DPI. Also, notice that we can render with different layers. This is a little bit more advanced, and we can cover this topic in a different webinar, but this is going to allow you to run different layers and produce different effects using multiple render passes. And then if you have KeyShot Pro, we have the queue. And the queue is going to let you create multiple renders or queue up multiple renders that will take place in sequence, meaning that once one render is finished, it will automatically begin the next. This is very useful if you have multiple renders that you would like to run. Often renders are time-based, and being time-based, you don't really want to sit there and wait. So being able to place multiple renders in one queue and go to sleep and wake up the next day and have them all done is very useful. Then we also have our options, and here you can see that we have our CPU usage. We also have the ability to determine our quality. So we can define how long we're going to let our object render based on these quality settings. Max samples is going to determine how many samples we take for that final render. You can see, for instance, that in this specific, in my model window right now, if you look at my heads-up display, we have our samples, and our samples are at 215, 216, meaning that if we wanted this quality image, we would probably go for around 200 samples. You can also specify with max time. So once more in the heads-up display, you can see it's taking me about 2 minutes, 3 minutes to create this render. And I can always just say render for 3 minutes and give me that final product. And then we have our custom control. These are going to be very specific settings, and we can go into that later on if you guys have individual questions. So max samples, max time. Also notice that max samples and max time are going to be calculated on that heads up display. It's also going to be calculated based on your output settings. So right now our resolution is 1160 by 773. Notice here that my resolution is 800 by 533, meaning that we would achieve a similar render for that resolution at a quicker time. If we increase this, let's say to something like then it's going to take around 4 times as long, since we have 4 times as many pixels. So just pay attention to that, or maybe that twice as long, twice as many pixels. Cool. So just pay attention to that. Your render time is going to really be determined by your render settings and your output settings. So once we're happy with that, we can always render. We also have the ability to create animations and KeyShot XRs. KeyShot XRs are going to be files that allow for rotation of your model and are going to display those different views based on your selection. So as you can see, we can create different rotations and different views, and these views are going to be all included within one file, so you can quickly move it and take a look at that, include it in an HTML, and have it accessible on a website. And then finally, we have animations, and we can go through our animation workflow quickly, take a look at some of those. So we'll exit the rendering. Now, to create an animation, let's say we wanted this to be able to be opened and closed, we'd be able to go to the animation tab. There, that's going to open up our bottom window for our animations. There we can use our animation wizard to define different animations, either for our model or part or our camera. So here we're going to have animations that include the movement of specific components within our assembly. And our camera is going to be the movement of our camera in relationship to our environment and to our object. So those are all different options that we can choose. So let's just go ahead and add a couple of different animations. I'll do a turntable animation, and I'll just say next. And here you can see it's asking me what models I would like to create or select for that turntable animation. I'll just choose the whole assembly and now say OK. And now once I've done that, you can see we have our degrees of rotation. We also have the center of rotation, so either model or environment, and also the direction of our rotation. Then underneath that, we have our motion easing. So if we choose to, we can ease in and ease out, meaning that our rotation is going to start slow, speed up, and then slow down. And underneath that, we have our start, end, and duration. So here we can define our specific start times and end times. As you can see, that's going to be represented in our animation window as well in this green toolbar here. And we have our total duration length. Once I'm happy with those, I can just say finish. Now I can play, and you can see it's easing in and easing out. We can always choose different FPS if we'd like to make that a little bit smoother. And we can loop. As you can see, it's continuing to run. Now, once we've created this animation, we have a couple of different options. So I can always select it and mirror, meaning that it's going to spin and then spin the other way and create that opposite animation. This can be useful for explodes or other effects that you would like to reverse themselves immediately. You also have the ability in this toolbar to change the lengths of these specific objects too, and change their location on that toolbar. You can also double click, and that's going to allow you to enter into the properties and redefine that specific animation if you would like. Also, as far as animations go, as you continue to add animations, this animation window can become cluttered. So let's say we added a camera animation, and this is going to be an inclination. Then we'd be able to define this, finish, and now you can see we're going to have that movement and we're going to have our camera animation as well. But if we would like to, we can always select multiple animations, right click, and group them with a folder. That's going to allow us to clean up this bar so we'd be able to associate multiple animations together. Now, there are other things that you can do with animations to allow for multiple animations to be linked similar to materials or other objects. I'm going to go ahead and stop here for now. We're at around 50 minutes, so this would be a good time for questions and answers. I really appreciate your time. If you guys have any questions regarding this information, please feel free to reach out either directly to me if my contact information is provided, or to your representative. We can always set up a one-on-one presentation or demonstration to address your specific questions. So with that, let's go ahead and see if there are any questions for me.
All right, well, thank you, Joe, very much. I appreciate that presentation. You did an excellent job here. It looks at the moment we don't have any specific questions, but however you kind of indicated yourself, any of you individuals who are joining us on the webinar today, please feel free to reach out to your closest representative, or if you want, you can go ahead and send us an email through our Contact Us page at www.tristar.com, and we'd be more than happy to go ahead and get those questions answered for you. Other than that, if we have no other incoming questions, I'll just go ahead and thank you very much for taking the time and joining our webinar today, and we look forward to speaking with you later. Have an excellent day. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you.